unlimited drama series.
The iPad glowed like a confession in the dark living room, and what I saw there made my coffee taste like betrayal. 2 years of marriage, 7 years together, and Leah had been documenting her affair like some twisted travel blogger. Photos of her and Chad tangled in hotel sheets, text messages that would make a sailor blush, expense reports that told the real story of her client meetings. My name is Iliad Harper, and at 42, I thought I'd seen enough of life's ugliness during my 15 years teaching high school English. Kids lie, parents lie, administrators lie. But your wife? That's supposed to be the one person who doesn't turn your world into a Stephen King novel where everyone's hiding something dark. Eli, you're up late. Leah's voice drifted from the doorway, and I could smell the guilt on her like cheap cologne. She'd come home 3 hours ago from what she claimed was a girls' weekend at some lakeside spa. But the mud on her designer heels told a different story. So did the fact that she'd left her work bag here, the one with the iPad that was currently showing me exactly how creative she'd been getting with Chad Avery from her advertising agency. Couldn't sleep, I said, closing the device and setting it carefully on the coffee table. How was the spa? Very relaxing? She shifted her weight, and I noticed her blouse was buttoned wrong. Amateur mistake for someone who prided herself on image control. It was fine, tiring actually. We did a lot of hiking. In those heels? Leah glanced down at her feet like she'd forgotten what shoes she was wearing. I changed when I got back to the car. My sneakers got muddy. The lies came so easily to her that I almost admired the performance. Almost. But I'd spent too many years grading creative writing assignments to miss the plot holes. Chad's been texting you a lot, I said, watching her face go pale in the lamplight. Work emergency? How would you know about? She caught herself, but too late. Yes, work. Big client presentation Monday. Oh, I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch between us like a noose. She was good at lying, but I was better at reading people. 15 years of dealing with teenagers trying to explain why their homework looked exactly like Wikipedia articles had honed my bullshit detector to a fine point. Well, don't let me keep you from your beauty sleep, I said finally. You've got a big week ahead. She hesitated in the doorway, probably wondering if I knew more than I was letting on. Smart woman, my wife, just not smart enough to cover her digital tracks. After she went upstairs, I opened the iPad again and started taking screenshots. The photos were bad enough, Leah writhing beneath some pretty boy who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's health magazine. But the messages were worse. 2 months of planning secret getaways, laughing about how clueless I was, making jokes about my failed writing career, and how she was finally with a real man. Oh, that last part stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd been working on a novel for 3 years, sending out query letters and collecting rejections like some people collect stamps. Leah used to say she believed in my talent. Apparently, she'd been lying about that too. I scrolled through weeks of evidence, my anger crystallizing into something colder and more focused. Chad Avery, 31 years old, recently divorced, new creative director at Pinnacle Advertising, where my wife worked as an account executive. They'd been screwing in hotel rooms across 3 counties, using company expense accounts to fund their little romantic getaways. Oh, the really beautiful part? Leah had been documenting everything like she wanted to get caught. Photos with timestamps, receipts, even a few videos that would make a porn star blush. She'd always been detail-oriented in her work, but this was something else entirely. I closed the iPad and sat back in my recliner, staring at the family photos on the mantel. Our wedding day, vacations, Christmas mornings, all of it felt like evidence from someone else's life now. The man in those pictures had been naive enough to believe in happily ever after. The man sitting in this chair knew better. My phone buzzed with a text from Frankie, my old friend who tended bar at the Anchor downtown. You still up? Saw your wife's car at the Riverside Inn earlier. Thought you should know. I typed back, thanks, we'll talk tomorrow. So it wasn't just Chad she was meeting. Or maybe it was Chad, and the spa story was complete fiction. Either way, Leah had been busy building a whole second life while I graded papers and worked on my manuscript like a faithful husband. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was the contempt in those text messages. The way she and Chad laughed about my dreams, my failures, my trusting nature. They'd turned my love into a joke, my marriage into a punchline. But here's the thing about English teachers. We understand narrative structure. We know that every story has a beginning, middle, and end. We know about character development, rising action, and satisfying conclusions. Leah thought she was writing a romance novel where she got everything she wanted. but she'd forgotten that I was a writer too, and I preferred revenge stories. I spent the next hour going through our joint accounts, making lists, taking notes. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan that would make Machiavelli proud. Leah wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that her husband wasn't just some pathetic cuckold who'd roll over and take it. She was about to discover that nice guys finish last, but smart guys get even. The anchor hadn't changed in 20 years. Same sticky floors, same neon beer signs, same smell of cigarettes and broken dreams. Frankie wiped down glasses behind the bar with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned patience the hard way, first as a cop, then as someone who listened to other people's problems for a living. "You look like hell," he said when I slid onto a bar stool at 2 in the afternoon. "Let me guess, you found out about the affair. That obvious? I've been watching people self-destruct in here for 15 years. You've got that special look of a man who just discovered his wife's been lying about everything." He poured me a bourbon without asking. "How long have you known?" "Since last night. Found photos, messages, the whole digital trail. She's been documenting it like she wanted me to catch her." Frankie nodded grimly. "Some people sabotage their own happiness. Others just get sloppy when they think they're smarter than everyone else." I took a sip of bourbon and felt it burn away some of the numbness that had settled in my chest. "You said you saw her car at the Riverside Inn, Tuesday night, around 8, parked next to a white Tesla. Pretty boy got out first, then your wife. They weren't trying to hide it. Walked right into the lobby, like they owned the place." "Tesla, huh?" I pulled out my phone and showed him Chad's LinkedIn photo. "This the guy?" "That's him. Cocky little bastard, judging by the way he walked. Left his car in 2 parking spaces, like the rules don't apply to him." I filed that detail away. Men who parked like assholes usually had other character flaws worth exploiting. "What do you know about revenge, Frankie?" He stopped wiping the glass and gave me a long look. "The legal kind, or the kind that gets you arrested?" "Strictly legal. I'm not looking to go to prison over this. I just want justice." "Justice and revenge aren't the same thing." "They are when you're creative enough." Frankie laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "You always were too smart for your own good. What do you need?" "Information, surveillance, maybe some muscle if things get complicated." "I can do information and surveillance. The muscle depends on what you're planning." I outlined my preliminary ideas, while Frankie listened with the focused attention of someone who'd spent years taking witness statements. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "It's not illegal," he said finally. "Might be immoral, depending on your perspective, but not illegal. You sure you want to go down this road? Once you start, there's no taking it back. She made that choice for me when she decided to document her affair like a trophy collection." "Fair enough." He pulled out his phone. "I'll make some calls, see what I can find out about Loverboy. In the meantime, you might want to talk to Mrs. Dalrymple." "My neighbor. Why?" "Because she called here looking for you yesterday. Said she had information about your wife but didn't want to leave a message. That old lady sees everything that happens on your street." Dalrymple had lived next door for 30 years and treated neighborhood surveillance like a full-time job. I'd always found her nosiness annoying, but suddenly it seemed like a valuable resource. "I'll talk to her tonight." "Good, and Eli, be careful. Cheating wives can get dangerous when they're cornered." I finished my bourbon and left Frankie to his afternoon regulars. Outside, the October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and I felt more focused than I had in months. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was finally having a purpose beyond grading papers and collecting rejection letters. Mrs. Dalrymple was waiting for me on her front porch when I got home, like she'd been watching for my return. At 78, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to make every step count, but her mind was sharp as a razor. "I was wondering when you'd come talk to me," she said without preamble. "Saw you leave this morning looking like death warmed over." "Frankie said you called him. Didn't know how else to reach you. That wife of yours has been acting strange lately. Thought you should know." She invited me into her living room, which smelled like lavender and old books. The windows faced our house, providing a perfect view of the driveway and front yard. What kind of strange? Coming and going at odd hours, screaming phone conversations in her car. Last week, I saw her crying in the driveway at midnight, still in her work clothes. Crying? Like her heart was breaking. Then that fancy white car pulled up, never seen it before, and some young man got out. They argued for maybe 10 minutes before she got in his car, and they drove off. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What did they argue about? Couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear enough. He was angry. She was desperate. When she got in his car, she looked defeated. So Chad wasn't just Leah's affair partner. He was calling the shots. That added an interesting dynamic to the situation. Anything else? She's been getting deliveries. Expensive-looking packages, always when you're at work. Hides them in the garage before you get home. What kind of packages? Clothing boxes, mostly. Victoria's Secret? Some boutique places I've never heard of. Yesterday it was jewelry from Tiffany. Chad was buying her gifts, probably with money from his divorce settlement or his new job. The thought of some other man dressing my wife like his personal doll made my hands clench into fists. Mrs. Dalrymple, would you be willing to keep watching? Maybe take some photos if you see anything unusual? Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. I thought you'd never ask. I've got a telephoto lens from when Harold was alive. He used to photograph birds. I'd appreciate any help you can give me. That wife of yours always acted like she was better than the rest of us, she said with satisfaction. About time someone knocked her down a peg. I walked back to my house, feeling like a general who just recruited his first spy. Leah's car was in the driveway, which meant she was home early from work. Unusual for a Friday, but then again, everything about Leah had become unusual lately. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, and cooking dinner like nothing had happened. The domestic scene would have been touching if I hadn't known she was probably planning her next rendezvous with Chad. How was your day? She asked, without looking up from the stove. Educational. Yours? Long meeting with a difficult client. I'm exhausted. Another lie. According to her phone's location data, which I could track through our shared Apple account, she'd spent 2 hours at the Riverside Inn this afternoon. Same place Frankie had seen her earlier in the week. Maybe you should take the weekend off. Relax, spend some time at home. She tensed slightly, stirring the pasta with unnecessary force. Actually, I have to work tomorrow. Big presentation Monday, remember? Right, the one Chad's been texting you about. This time she did look at me, and I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes before she covered it with irritation. It's a team project. We all have to communicate. Of course, I'm sure Chad's very hands-on with his projects. The double meaning hung in the air between us like smoke. Leah turned back to the stove, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, she said. I'll go wash up. Instead, I went to my study and started researching Chad Avery, social media, professional profiles, public records, everything I could find about the man who was sleeping with my wife. By the time Leah called me for dinner, I knew his address, his salary, his ex-wife's name, and the fact that he'd been sued for sexual harassment at his previous job. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Saturday morning brought rain and opportunity. Leah left for her work meeting at 9, kissing my cheek with lips that had been wrapped around another man's cock less than 24 hours ago. The hypocrisy was almost admirable in its completeness. I waited 30 minutes, then called the Riverside Inn. Good morning. I'd like to book the honeymoon suite for tonight, I told the cheerful desk clerk. Same room my wife and I used for our anniversary last month. Harper, party of 2. Oh yes, Mr. Harper. We have you in our system. The usual champagne and roses? Perfect. The usual champagne and roses? Leah had been playing house with Chad using our anniversary as cover story. The audacity was breathtaking. After booking the room, I drove to Chad's apartment complex, a trendy development near the university where young professionals paid too much for exposed brick and industrial lighting. His white Tesla was parked in space 247, taking up part of the adjacent spot like Frankie had predicted. I parked across the street and waited. At 10:15, Chad emerged wearing designer jeans and a leather jacket that probably cost more than I made in a month teaching. He looked exactly like what he was, a pretty boy who'd learned that good looks and smooth talk could get him anything he wanted. He drove toward downtown, and I followed at a distance, until he pulled into the Riverside Inn parking lot. Leah's car was already there, tucked discreetly behind the building. I took photos of both vehicles, then settled in to wait. They emerged 2 hours later, looking satisfied and careless. Chad had his hand on Leah's ass as they walked to their cars, and she was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The intimacy of the gesture hit me harder than the explicit photos had. That afternoon, I put my plan into motion. First, I called the hotel's fire department liaison, a contact I'd made during my research, and reported a gas leak in the honeymoon suite. Not enough to cause real danger, just enough to...
You wrote him love poems. In 10 years, you never wrote me a word.
It was emotional.
How is he telling in another?
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
trigger an evacuation alarm. Then I positioned myself in the lobby with a newspaper and waited. Leah and Chad arrived at 7, checking in like they owned the place. The desk clerk recognized them, greeting them with the familiarity of regular customers. They disappeared upstairs, and I started my timer. At 8:30, right on schedule, the fire alarm began shrieking. Guests poured out of rooms in various states of undress, but none more compromising than Leah and Chad, who stumbled into the hallway wearing nothing but hotel bathrobes. Leah's hair was disheveled, her lips swollen, and Chad looked like he'd been interrupted mid-thrust. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The hallway was crowded with a wedding party who'd been getting ready for their reception. 20-something bridesmaids in matching robes, groomsmen in tuxedo pants, and a very traditional-looking mother of the bride who stared at Leah and Chad with obvious disapproval. I filmed everything from the stairwell, capturing Leah's mortification as she tried to hide behind Chad while explaining to the fire marshal that they were just friends having a business meeting. The fire department found no gas leak, of course, just a faulty sensor that would mysteriously repair itself by morning. Leah came home 3 hours later, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She found me in the living room, reading and sipping wine like I'd spent a quiet evening at home. "How was work?" I asked innocently. "Fine." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm going to bed." Sweet dreams. Sunday morning brought the first real consequences. Leah discovered that our joint credit cards had been canceled, our shared bank account frozen, and her access to our investment portfolio suspended. All perfectly legal. I'd simply exercised my rights as an equal account holder to protect our assets during what I told the bank was a potential divorce situation. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, waving her laptop at me like a weapon. "Protected our financial interests. I heard rumors that you might be making some questionable spending decisions." "What rumors? Who told you that?" I shrugged, not looking up from my coffee and newspaper. Small town, people talk. "This is insane, Eli. I need those accounts for work expenses." "Then I suggest you use your personal accounts, or ask Chad to help out. I'm sure he'd be happy to cover your hotel bills." The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you think you know. I know that the Riverside Inn has excellent security cameras. I know that their honeymoon suite has a very distinctive layout. And I know that you've been charging your romantic getaways to our joint credit card." She sank into a chair, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured tire. "How long have you known? Does it matter? Are you going to divorce me?" I folded my newspaper and looked at her directly for the first time in days. "I haven't decided yet. Depends on how this plays out." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that you can't just shit all over someone and expect them to smile and say thank you. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been fucking Chad Avery for 2 months, using our money to pay for hotels, and laughing about what a pathetic loser your husband is." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You read our messages, every single one. Very entertaining, by the way. I particularly enjoyed the part where you called me a failed writer with delusions of talent." I was angry. "No, you were honest. Maybe for the first time in months." I stood up and headed for the door. "I'm going out. When I get back, I expect you to be gone. Take whatever you need for a few days. We'll talk when you're ready to have an adult conversation about the future." Where am I supposed to go? I hear Chad has a nice apartment. Or maybe the Riverside Inn offers weekly rates. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her useless credit cards and trying to figure out how her perfect little affair had turned into a financial disaster. It was a good start, but I was just getting warmed up. The real fun would begin when Chad realized that sleeping with married women came with complications he hadn't anticipated. Monday morning brought the first casualty of war. Leah called me from Chad's apartment, her voice tight with controlled panic. "The agency knows," she said without preamble. "Knows what?" Don't play dumb, Eli. Someone sent anonymous emails to HR with photos from the hotel. They're conducting an investigation. I sipped my coffee and watched Mrs. Dalrymple tend her garden, probably listening to every word through the thin walls. That's unfortunate. Office affairs can be so messy. This could destroy my career. Should have thought of that before you started documenting your adultery like a sex blogger. I know you're angry, but please. I'm not angry, Leah. Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely. She was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from me? I want you to experience consequences, real ones, not just the inconvenience of having to use your own credit card. And then what? We go back to playing happy couple? That depends on how well you learn from this experience. After hanging up, I drove to the high school where I'd taught for 15 years. Principal Waters was an old friend who'd been asking me to come back since I'd taken early retirement to focus on writing. He greeted me with the enthusiasm of a man desperate for qualified English teachers. Eli, please tell me you're ready to come back. I've got 3 long-term substitutes who couldn't teach grammar to a linguistics professor. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else. The PTA meeting tomorrow night. I'd like to attend as a community member. Of course, but why? You don't have kids. I'm considering getting more involved in local education, maybe running for school board. It was a lie, but a useful one. What I really wanted was a public forum where I could encounter Chad and Leah in front of people who mattered: parents, teachers, community leaders. Small-town politics were built on reputation and gossip, and I intended to use both to my advantage. That afternoon, I met Frankie at the Anchor for what he called an intelligence briefing. Your boy Chad has some interesting skeletons, he said, sliding a manila folder across the sticky table. Sexual harassment lawsuit at his previous job, settled out of court. 2 affairs that I could confirm, probably more. And his ex-wife has some very unflattering things to say about his character, such as, he's a serial cheater who targets married women specifically. Likes the challenge, apparently, and the built-in excuse when things get complicated. I opened the folder and scanned the documents Frankie had compiled. Chad's pattern was clear. He seduced unhappy wives, enjoyed the thrill of the affair, then disappeared when the situation became inconvenient. Leah was just his latest conquest. There's more, Frankie continued. His ex-wife, Madison, lives about an hour north. She's been following his career moves, trying to warn his employers about his behavior. Might be interested in meeting you. Set it up. Already did. She'll be here Thursday at 7. What about the Tesla? Frankie grinned like a wolf. Funny thing about fancy cars. They're very sensitive to environmental factors. Salt water, for instance, can do terrible things to the electrical system. I wouldn't know anything about that. Of course not. You're a respectable English teacher who would never condone vandalism. Tuesday night's PTA meeting was held in the high school auditorium, the same room where I'd directed student plays and watched graduation ceremonies. About 50 parents and teachers filled the first few rows, discussing budget allocations and standardized test scores with the passionate intensity of people who cared deeply about things that didn't really matter. I arrived early and chose a seat in the back, positioning myself for maximum visibility when Chad and Leah inevitably showed up. They'd been living together since Sunday, according to Mrs. Dalrymple's surveillance reports, and Leah had been crying frequently enough to concern the neighbors. At 7:15, they walked in together, trying to look casual despite the obvious tension between them. Leah wore a conservative dress and minimal makeup, probably hoping to project respectability while her personal life imploded. Chad looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They sat 3 rows ahead of me, and I could see Leah's shoulders tense when she spotted me in her peripheral vision. Chad remained oblivious until I stood up during the public comment period. I'd like to address the importance of ethical behavior in our educational community, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Our children learn as much from what we do as from what we teach them. Several heads nodded in agreement. These were parents who worried about moral decay and the influence of social media on their kids' values. When adults in positions of trust, whether teachers, administrators, or community partners, fail to maintain appropriate boundaries, it sends a message that rules don't matter, that commitments can be broken without consequences. Chad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was smart enough to recognize a veiled attack, but not bold enough to respond publicly. I believe we need to hold ourselves to higher standards, I continued. Adultery, dishonesty, and the abuse of professional relationships have no place in institutions dedicated to shaping young minds. The room was completely quiet now. Several people were looking at Chad and Leah, who had become very interested in studying their hands. "Thank you for your time," I concluded, sitting down to scattered applause. Principal Waters looked confused, but pleased. "Thank you, Mr. Harper, for that passionate reminder of our shared values." After the meeting, Chad cornered me in the parking lot, while Leah waited by his car, looking miserable. What the hell was that about?" he demanded. "Community involvement. I thought I was very clear. You're trying to embarrass us. I'm trying to participate in local democracy. If you feel embarrassed, maybe you should examine why." He stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. "Stay away from us, old man. This isn't your business anymore. Actually, since you're sleeping with my wife, I'd say it's very much my business. Soon-to-be ex-wife. We'll see about that." I walked to my car, leaving Chad standing under the parking lot lights like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. Through my rearview mirror, I watched him argue with Leah before they drove away in separate vehicles. The cracks were starting to show. Wednesday brought news that Leah had been suspended pending the HR investigation. Chad was also under review, but as the new creative director, he had more political protection within the agency. "It's not fair," Leah said when she called me from Chad's apartment. "I've been with that company for 6 years. Fairness is a luxury you forfeited when you decided to shit where you eat. I need this job, Eli. I can't afford to lose it." "Then you should have thought about that before you started using company resources to fund your affair." "What company resources?" "Hotel charges on the corporate credit card, expense reports for dinners that were actually romantic dates, company car used for personal trips to meet your boyfriend." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "How do you know about all that?" "I'm a researcher, Leah. It's what writers do. We investigate, we dig, we find the truth buried under layers of lies and self-deception." "You're destroying my life." "No, I'm revealing the life you chose to build. There's a difference." That evening, Mrs. Dalrymple knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and a triumphant expression. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing me her camera. "Took these photos this afternoon." The images showed Chad's Tesla in his apartment parking lot, all 4 tires flat, and the word "cheater" spray-painted across the driver's side door. It was crude but effective, the kind of vandalism that suggested an angry spouse or betrayed girlfriend. "Did you see who did it?" "Young woman, maybe 25. Pretty little thing with blonde hair. She seemed to know exactly where to find the car." "Madison, Chad's ex-wife, right on schedule." "Terrible shame," I said, handing back the camera. "Vandalism is such a problem these days." Mrs. Dalrymple smiled. "Isn't it, though? Makes you wonder what kind of person inspires such strong feelings." Thursday's meeting with Madison confirmed everything Frankie had told me and more. She was petite, attractive, and absolutely furious about her ex-husband's continued pattern of destroying marriages. "He's a predator," she said over coffee at a diner halfway between our towns. "He specifically targets married women because he thinks they're safer, less likely to get clingy, more likely to keep quiet about the affair." "How many others have there been?" "That I know of. At least 4, probably more. He moves to a new job every 2 years, leaves a trail of broken marriages behind him." "Why haven't you exposed him before?" "I tried, but he's careful about legal boundaries, and most of his victims are too embarrassed to come forward." The harassment lawsuit was settled with a non-disclosure agreement. "What changed?" Madison smiled grimly. "I got tired of watching him destroy families, and I heard through mutual friends that his current victim's husband might be interested in fighting back." "What do you know about fighting back?" "More than you might think. I've been documenting his pattern for 3 years, building a case that any future employer would find very interesting." She slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything's on there. Photos, testimony from other victims, financial records showing how he uses company resources to fund his affairs. Enough to destroy his career if it ever became public." "What do you want in return?" "I want him to face real consequences for once. I want him to understand that he can't just move on to the next victim when this one gets complicated." "Consider it done." Friday brought the first crack in Chad and Leah's relationship. According to Mrs. Dalrymple's surveillance, they'd had a screaming fight in his apartment parking lot that ended with Leah throwing something at his car and storming off. She called me that afternoon, crying. "He wants me to move out," she sobbed. "Says I'm bringing too much drama into his life." Shocking. A serial cheater turns out to be unreliable. "I don't have anywhere else to go. The hotel bills are too expensive, and I can't afford an apartment without my job. You could try apologizing. To who? To me. To your coworkers. To everyone whose trust you violated while you were playing house with your boyfriend. Would that fix anything? It would be a start. But apologies only work when they're backed up by changed behavior. I don't know how to fix this. For the first time since discovering her affair, I felt something that might have been pity. But pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when the game was just getting interesting. Figure it out, Leah. You're a smart woman when you're not thinking with your hormones. The weekend would bring the final phase of my plan, and Chad was about to learn that some married men don't just roll over and accept betrayal. He was about to discover that revenge, properly executed, is an art form.